Thor 1 is the best Thor movie. Ragnarok is fine, but it suffers a bit from tonal whiplash. I also think Loki is a better villain than Hela. Not that Hela's bad, but Loki's better. So I have to say up front that personally, I do think that Ragnarok is the best of that Thor trilogy. I just think the comedy comes off so well, but you also still have some good story between Thor and the rest of his family. The visuals are great, and I think including Hulk was a great choice, and it's also a great example of what makes a connected movie universe so fun. That being said, I do see what you're getting at here, and I respect the hell out of this take. And here's why. My least favorite thing about the new Thor that was born in Ragnarok is this goofy, insincere attitude that he has. He's not always like that, but most of the time he is. And the amazing thing in hindsight about that first Thor movie was how sincere and genuine it was. It wasn't afraid to be cheesy, it wasn't afraid to be real and, just wear its heart on its sleeve. And I love what you said about Loki and Hela, because I do also agree that Loki was a better villain than Hela. Loki just in general is one of the best villains we've ever had in the MCU, because he's one of the few that actually has layers to him, and one of the few that survived longer than one single movie. So that relationship between Thor and Loki being front and center in that first Thor movie was a lot of fun to watch. Also, the music and direction overall by Kenneth Branagh really helped create this Shakespearean medieval type movie. And I've always said that the MCU is a game of genres. So when you have a movie that fits squarely into a genre that the MCU hasn't done yet, it's always a good thing. It's refreshing and it helps it stand out from its predecessors. And at the time that this movie came out, it was definitely doing that for the MCU. Now, the downside to Thor 1 is that Thor himself was a bit plain back then. I mean, let's just be honest, he was no one's favorite. But after they rebranded him in Ragnarok to be a little more humorous and relatable, you see a lot more Thor fans out there. I think the version of him that we saw in Infinity War was the perfect balance. He has this great scene with Rocket Raccoon where we do see a genuine and real side of him, which I think is very important to see, but he's still also a goofball every once in a while. And in a good way, too. I mean, he's got some good laughs in that movie. So overall, yes, I think we took that sense of sincerity in Thor 1 for granted. But thank you for leaving that comment, and welcome back to Between the Lines. This is the show where I gather your opinions, however good, however bad, and talk about however good or bad they may be. Today we're doing a very special episode of the show that is dedicated to the Infinity Saga of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So that means all Marvel Studios movies from Iron Man in 2008 all the way to Spider-Man Far From Home in 2019. This is the first chapter of the MCU that they call the Infinity Saga. So this isn't like a state of the MCU type video. We're not going to be talking about anything that happened after Spider-Man Far From Home. It's just Infinity Saga. As always, if you want to be part of the next episode, you can follow me over on Threads. I'll put the link in the description. But with that out of the way, let's get back to the show. Infinity War is better than Endgame. Okay, so first of all, I don't think this is a hot take at all. I hear people say this all the time. They always present it as an unpopular opinion, even though the fact that I hear it so much kind of proves otherwise. So to me at least, it does seem like there's a lot of people out there who feel this way. And I genuinely think that a good case can be made for either movie. It really just depends on your taste. Infinity War was so good as this massive crossover event. It was like an MCU fan's wildest dream. We got Captain America and Wakanda, we got Thor and Rocket Raccoon forging Stormbreaker, we got Iron Man fighting Thanos on Titan. That whole movie was like a shot of adrenaline. But I do think that comes at the cost of not really being able to dive into any one character specifically, beside Thanos, I guess. So it's less about those personal character moments and more about this massive war for the Infinity Stones, which, to be clear, I don't have a problem with. I think that's pretty awesome. But Endgame, on the other hand, is more intimate, and it's more the emotional climax of the Infinity Saga. We get to focus in a bit more on the original Avengers, and we get beautiful endings for pretty much all of them, especially Cap and Tony. So honestly, I feel like both movies did what they needed to do, and between the two, we kind of got this perfect 1-2 punch to finish off the first chapter of the MCU. We got a huge crossover with tons of action, and we got an emotionally satisfying end to the story we've been following for 10 years. Some people prefer the scale of Infinity War, and some people prefer the emotions of Endgame. I think both are valid. I think Edward Norton was a better Hulk than Mark Ruffalo. Okay, so for some of the newer fans out there who may not even know this, Bruce Banner in the MCU was originally portrayed by Edward Norton in the 2008 movie, The Incredible Hulk. I know, it's crazy to think back to a time when the Hulk actually got his own movies. But I guess there were some creative differences with Edward Norton, so by the time they were filming the first Avengers movie, they had to recast. And that's when Mark Ruffalo became Bruce Banner. Mark Ruffalo is a very talented actor. I feel like his post-MCU career especially has been really good, but I just don't know if he was ever such a great fit for Bruce Banner. At least not as good of a fit as Edward Norton was, who I think just flat out looks the part of a scrawny little scientist much more, and also just has the vibe of a guy with 7 PhDs who hasn't slept in a week. And you know, I'm no Hulk expert for sure, but I've always felt that a big part of the character was that duality between the scrawny scientist and the massive muscular monster. It's the contrast that's so important. And again, I feel that Norton embodied this better than Ruffalo did. But one thing I want to mention here, because I have seen a rise of people saying this online, what some people are referring to is what Norton's Hulk used to be, which was this uncontrollable green ball of rage. Whereas Ruffalo's Hulk by the end of the Infinity Saga was much more toned down and much less powerful. And I actually agree with that too, but I think it's a separate argument from what's inside of this comment, which, yes, if you haven't noticed, was left by me. I just had to slip this one in. I think Norton would have played the character better and would have fit in with the Avengers cast more naturally. I know that's probably hard for some people to hear because we've all gotten attached to Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner over the course of the Infinity Saga, but it's just the way that I feel. One thing I think we can all agree on here, though, is that Marvel Studios really needs to sort out the rights with Universal so that we can eventually get another solo Hulk movie. Because it's such a cool character that I don't think has been done true justice yet. And it's possible that many of the problems people have could go away if Hulk just had his own movie giving some more depth to the character instead of just putting him on the sideline somewhere. The most interesting Iron Man movie is Iron Man 3 because it's the psychological consequences of being Iron Man. Iron Man 3 I do feel is a bit underrated, or at least overlooked within the sea of MCU movies. And it is very interesting because it's not just about the psychological consequences of being Iron Man, but also the consequences of finding out that aliens are real and that they're out there trying to kill you. And the movie does a great job of showing how these things affect Tony mentally. Tony used to be so reckless and carefree, and that's how we had seen him up until this point. But here we start to see him carry a little weight with him. Even with its flaws, Iron Man 3 was such a great follow-up to that first Avengers movie and a great finish to the Iron Man trilogy. Tony finally has to reconcile with his relationship to Iron Man, which has basically been his entire identity up until this point. And it's really nice how Tony is reminded of the fact that it's not the suit that makes the man, but the man that makes the suit. Like he tells Peter in Spider-Man Homecoming.
If you're nothing without this suit, then you shouldn't have it, okay? God, I sound like my dad.
Now, is Iron Man 3 the best Iron Man? I know that's not what you're claiming here, but I figured we could discuss it. I think it's close for sure, like it's probably worth having a conversation, but for me, Iron Man 1 still has a slight edge. I don't have any major problems with Iron Man 3, like I know some people were really bothered by the Mandarin twist, where the Mandarin ends up not really being the Mandarin, but I didn't have an issue with that. I just think it's a little corny at times, and tonally just feels a little weird. But getting back to this comment, I really do feel like the strong suit of this movie is exploring Tony's psyche and the effect that the whole Iron Man thing has on him. I still don't believe how anyone could ever be Team Cap. The whole Civil War discourse to me is so funny because A, people are still fighting about it, and B, I think people are a little bit confused when they're talking about which side they're on. Because generally when you find someone who's on Team Iron Man, for example, what they're basing their choice off of is Cap siding with Bucky after Tony finds out that he's the one who killed his parents. Like, some people can't believe that directly after this, Cap helps Bucky beat the shit out of Tony. And so they say, I'm Team Iron Man, because they feel like Cap was in the wrong there. But the other group of people who say that they're on Team Cap usually base their decision off of the main conflict of the movie, the Sokovia Accords, which, if you don't remember, is basically the government wanting to take control of the Avengers. And Captain America doesn't think this is a good idea, so people who agree with that say they're on Team Cap. So you have people saying that they're on either side, but they're not even necessarily disagreeing about anything. I don't know, I just think it's funny. Also, the movie was pretty clear by the end that Cap was right about the Sokovia Accords. Just saying. Absolutely loved Captain Marvel. It's in my top 5. Flame away. Captain Marvel is one of those movies that was surrounded by nauseating discourse online, but when you watch it in a vacuum, it's a great time. Personally, I really liked unraveling the mystery of Carol's past. I liked getting to see a young Nick Fury in action, and Brie Larson was a great choice for the character. Don't let people make you feel like you have to apologize for enjoying a movie. I think it's fair to make your argument for why you did or didn't like something. In fact, for some people, that discussion is half of the fun of going to the movies. But at the end of the day, your opinion is your own, and you feel the way that you feel. You shouldn't feel ashamed for liking any movie, unless that movie is Thor: Love and Thunder. Sorry, I know that's not Infinity Saga, but I couldn't resist. But getting back to this comment, my one nitpick for this movie, I don't like the backstory for Fury's eye patch being revealed as he was scratched by a cat. This, to me, is the MCU's worst impulse, which is to take something that's cool or genuine or serious and turn it into a cheap joke. It might get a laugh out of you once, but after that, you're left with nothing. Fury as a character is so badass and so mysterious, and I get that's why this works as a joke, but it lessens the mystique surrounding the character for the weakest laugh, if that even. It was absolutely not worth it. The snap was preposterously silly. Thanos traveled across the galaxy or universe or multiverse or whatever to collect 6 overpowered magical stones, granting him the godlike authority to eliminate half of all living things in existence. And what did he do with all this power? He snapped. I can snap. It's underwhelming. I understand that the end result was devastating and would have been regardless of execution. I'm just saying he could have put a little more flair on it. Embrace some theatrics. Okay, I think that you have a catastrophic misunderstanding of the snap. The whole point of Thanos snapping, as opposed to some other gesture, is to show how easy it is. The snap itself is symbolic. Have you ever heard someone say that they could snap their fingers and have something done? The reason they use a snap as the example is because it's extremely low effort. Getting something done at the snap of your fingers is a demonstration of power. Could he have done something else as he erased half of all life? Sure, he could have clapped, or I don't really know what you want him to do, put on a light show or something, but I don't think Thanos was ever really about theatrics. He's not Loki. The snap was just a gesture, and it's meant to show how powerful he was at that moment. Iron Man 2 is the best of the Iron Man trilogy. All right, listen. I've been pretty nice up until this point, but there is nothing I can agree with here. I guess the suit-up scene on the racetrack is pretty cool, but it doesn't make up for the rest of the movie just being a mess. In fact, I'll go even further and say that making a second Iron Man movie before the first Avengers movie was a mistake in general. It was cursed from the very beginning. Now, if you want to tell me that Iron Man 2 is underrated, then that's one thing, but best of the trilogy is insane. In my opinion, the continuity of the films to each other is often rather limiting. The comics often take each other much less seriously and still allow crossovers. Just give the characters more breathing space without always having to build something for the future. So, you make a good point. I like what you're saying, but I get frustrated with this because I constantly see people swap-swapping, going back and forth on this. Because you're correct that the shared universe is limiting at times, especially after more and more movies get made in the MCU, because they all introduce new concepts and new characters, and the further that you get along, the easier that it becomes to contradict something that you set up before. So it's kind of like, in order for the larger universe to work, you have to set up these boundaries that each movie has to operate within. For example, any big changes or long-term consequences are probably off the table for most MCU movies, because it might create conflicts with the other movies. So if the Russo brothers wanted to kill off Thor in their Avengers movie, the higher-ups at Marvel, like Kevin Feige, might say, no, you can't do that because we have our own plans for Thor, so they write that out. And now the original vision for the movie has been compromised, and we don't like to see that. But on the other hand, when there is an MCU movie that doesn't build toward a larger future or doesn't feature any elements of the shared universe, then people complain about that too. I mean, after all, what's the point of a connected universe of movies if you can't even tell that they're connected? So I understand that side of the argument as well. Operating within the MCU can be restraining and limiting, but it's what makes it the MCU. So I don't know if there's a very clean-cut answer here, but I do want to point out that in hindsight, this is what the Infinity Saga did so well. We had these solo, character-driven movies that each told their own isolated stories. So they were approachable and enjoyable on their own, even without knowing the larger context of the MCU. But those movies at the same time, whether it was in a post-credits scene or whatever, would also contribute one small part to the larger story being told. So it's like you were getting the best of both worlds. A fun, contained superhero story, and also that feeling that you're constantly building towards something bigger. And then an Avengers movie every 3 years or so would satisfy that anticipation, but then also hint that you were building towards something even bigger. Of course, along the way, they did have certain restraints like we mentioned, but I think they did a good job of making it feel like those restraints weren't there. For example, a Guardians of the Galaxy movie takes place so far away from all the other MCU stuff, there's basically no restraints on what it can and can't do. But at the same time, they still find a way to make it feel like it's a part of the larger story by introducing Thanos or the Power Stone or something like that. It's a tricky balance, but the Infinity Saga made it look effortless. So I do agree with this comment that shared universes can be limiting, but it's no excuse to make a bad movie. You know, like, get a little creative, and if you can truly no longer make a good movie within the confines provided by the MCU, then we've got other problems. And with that, I think this is a good place to call it. Again, if you want to be featured next time, you can follow me over on Threads. I'll put the link in the description. That's where I'll post the prompt for the next episode. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and stay gold.